Before we begin, just a quick note. The patients, caregivers, and community-based organizations of the Sickle Cell Consortium are delighted to provide this Warrior University platform as a curriculum-based educational module. However, please note this is a general discussion and is not meant to replace the advice or instructions of your doctor or other healthcare professional. Statements made here are not meant to reflect the policies, thoughts, or opinions of the consortium and do not imply endorsement or recruitment of any product, service, or clinical trial. If you all would like to ask questions, questions can be typed into the chat box. You can address them directly to an individual here privately or to the presenter. The presenters are Ashley Valentine, Maggie, and Beverly Francis Gibson. Their names are listed next to their chat. You can hover over their name and send a question to them directly. You can also direct your question, or if you have a private question, you can direct it to host, and that says Sickle Cell Consortium, and I can ask that question on your behalf. We're starting now. We're going to ask that please be reminded that this is being recorded, and so private questions can be sent privately to host or directly to a presenter. Welcome, 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 and thank you for joining us. We're glad that you all were able to join us as we give part 2 of this discussion all about ICER. I am Lakia, Dr. Lakia Bailey, the Executive Director of the Sickle Cell Community Consortium, and we are delighted to have partnered with PIPC, NMQF, SCDAA, Sickle Cycle, and Sick Cells to present this ICER series. Last time you learned all about ICER, QALY, and everything that is involved therein. This session will be talking more about the ICER draft evidence report that is available. The address to find that report can be found in the chat box to go and see the report directly. There has been an accelerated push to respond to ICER, and so we are talking about what ICER is, what they're doing, and what all of this means. We're glad to have experts in this space, such as Ashley Valentine and Maggie with Sick Cells, to discuss all of this with us. We're excited to work with PIPC, which brought us all together, and with SCDAA, the national organization, to present a response in this area. I did want to mention briefly before we get started that we're very excited to be doing this work together. I wanted to point out some interesting information that I think has been left out. So the welcome, that's me, Lakia Bailey. Overdraft of the ICER timeline, the draft report, and next step will be Ashley Valentine and Maggie Jalowski of Sick Cells. And then community collaboration and question will come from President Beverly Francis Gibson of SCDAA. I've been working in this field and in this space for quite some time, and I asked the team, could I bring up one particular thing in that we know what ICER is and what they're doing and the models of which they're doing. I did want to point out and give a nod to the NHLBI and their Clinical and Economics Impact Analysis Consortium, funded in 2019 with the main goal to develop simulation models that can be used to demonstrate the potential national impact of specific curative therapies for sickle cell disease and the distribution of that impact on patients and their family, payers, and employers. This group is doing some of the similar work to what ICER does, but specifically for sickle cell disease. And this consortium has gathered those solely in this space to evaluate drugs, new treatments, therapies, as well as curative-based approach. And so we do have some that are working in this space, looking at this from a different perspective. I do want to give a nod to that group and the work that they're doing. I'm excited to have been and pleased to be part of that, part of Cure SCI, and part of this consortia specifically. This has previously been headed by Dr. Nikayla Cook. Nikayla has now been named the executive director of PCORI, and so we are losing her. But they're doing fantastic work in this space and will continue to do that. Some of the goals of this consortia are to do this landscape analysis, to understand the lifetime burden of this illness and provide information for SCD standards of care, simulation models, and to estimate the lifetime cost of sickle cell and the clinical and economic impact of SCD standard of care compared with emergency genetic therapies, and comparing these models of new and existing treatments and therapies with new curative ones, and then to disseminate this study results. We've been looking in this field and in this space for a long time, and we know some of the pitfalls of the way in which ICER has taken on this particular problem, and we know some of the inherent discrimination that is found therein. And so here to talk more about the particular draft report that has come out recently and to get started with a important community response. We know the power of the patient and the power of the caregiver voice. And at the consortium, we believe in harnessing that power and amplifying it, that patients and caregivers should be at the center of all work that we do. And so we're excited to be doing this and glad to be joined by Ashley Valentine and Maggie, who I will give it over to now to start part 2 of this discussion. Ashley?
Great, thank you, Lakia. And thank you for that overview. That's really exciting work that the Cure SCD initiative is doing. So if you could just take us to the next slide, please. Great. So I'm Ashley Valentine. I'm co-founder and president of Sickle Cells, and I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about the ICER timeline for sickle cell disease. And if you're new to ICER, as a reminder, the Institute for Clinical and Economic Review is conducting a value assessment on the 3 new sickle cell disease therapies. So those are Emmaus Medical's Endari, Novartis's Adakveo, and Global Blood Therapeutics Oxbryta. So where we are in the timeline is that ICER has released their draft evidence report on these 3 new medications last Thursday, January 23rd. If you're interested in learning more about ICER's broader timeline and when they started the sickle cell review in August, you can visit their website, which is here on the slide. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when you're reviewing the draft evidence report, you'll notice that the report is broken out into 4 sections. So it's a very long report. It's 192 pages. But just to give you a preparation of what you'll see, there's a section on background and context about sickle cell disease. There's a review of the evidence that ICER has gathered and data that ICER uses in its reports. There's a section about ICER's preliminary cost effectiveness analysis, and then there's recommendations of a price that ICER believes is fair for the new sickle cell disease treatment. So we recognize that this is a draft report, but we do want to point out that likely ICER will not make major changes to their economic model once the report is finalized. Now, something to note, while there might not be major changes to the economic model, it is important for the community, the sickle cell community, patients, caregivers, and multiple stakeholders to take a stand, read the report, and share your side of the story during the entire ICER review. Next slide. Great. So you'll see right now we are in an open public comment period. So the public has an opportunity to comment on this report and share your perspective during this time. All public comments that are submitted to ICER will be included on the record, and stakeholders will have opportunities to submit a public comment. And so just to clarify what counts as a stakeholder, stakeholders are our sickle cell warriors and their caregivers. And caregivers are people like me, myself. My brother has sickle cell. It's also people like parents and grandparents and spouses, or anyone who's caring for someone with sickle cell disease. The community is also reaching out to clinicians and researchers to comment on the data that's being used in this ICER report. Additionally, we're reaching out and talking with other groups like associations and minority health groups to weigh in on this report. We will share more information during this webinar on how you can submit a public comment and also share your sickle cell story. Next slide. Great. So after the public comment period closes on February 20th, we'll be preparing for the in-person meeting. Currently, the meeting agenda and discussion questions are posted on ICER's website. Patients and community members will be invited by ICER to speak at this public meeting. Additionally, there will be many other opportunities and efforts to share your story prior to the meeting. So if you're interested in participating in any of these efforts, you can reach out to Thayer from PIPC. Her email is listed here, and PIPC is helping us collaborate as a community at this time. So ICER hosts a public meeting for each of these reports and reviews that they conduct. For sickle cell disease, the public meeting is March 26th in Boston. The meeting consists of a review of the report findings, a policy roundtable discussion, and a vote on the cost effectiveness of the 3 sickle cell disease drugs. The meeting is public and anyone can attend. So we're working hard to gather advocates to attend in person. Additionally, ICER will be live streaming the meeting. So if you can't attend in person because of the financial cost to go or the weather in Boston at this time, you can join remotely and tune in that way. Next slide. And finally, after this is all done, ICER will release its final report. The final report will summarize the overall findings from the evidence report and include a summary of the public meeting. All of this will be released on April 16th. This is the report that will ultimately be used by payers and other stakeholders in decision-making for sickle cell disease and access. As a community, we must ensure that we're engaged every step of the way. Great, next slide. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Maggie Jalowski, to take us through more of the report, but I do want to note some of our overall comments and major concerns about this evidence report and this value assessment of sickle cell disease. So our major comment on the report is that given that with these new treatments emerging into the market, it is really sort of an inappropriate time right now for a value assessment. So for anyone who has worked and lived in sickle cell disease or has lived in this space, we know that there has been a grave disparity in healthcare and access to quality of healthcare for people living with sickle cell disease. Much of this is because of racism, stigma, and prejudice. We're just now entering a new era for sickle cell disease where the broader public is understanding the severity of the disease, and researchers and the governments are investing funding to understand the true burden and severity of sickle disease and provide us with real solutions. Because of all of this, there's a lack of reliable or robust data for sickle cell disease that looks at outcomes that are most meaningful to patients and families about the true costs associated living with sickle cell disease. So we just want to say, we understand ICER's mission to take a deep dive into drug pricing to make a more efficient healthcare system. However, for a condition like sickle cell disease, who has faced years and years of grave disparities and neglect, it's concerning to do this type of review prematurely when the data is just not there. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Maggie Jalowski, and she can give you a high-level overview of some of the areas in the draft evidence report.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. We want to first highlight one of the sections that Ashley mentioned, which is the patient perspective section of ICER's report. In here, you'll find a robust summary of the history of sickle cell disease and the impact that it has had on patients and families. Overall, we were pleased to see that put a lot of effort into including the patient voice into this section. We can tell that ICER has spent a great deal of time collecting information from many different sources. However, one of the concerns we want to talk about is it is not clear at this time how this information has impacted the current pricing or the economic models that are used in their analyses. Additionally, the report does note that some of the analyses will be updated in the final report. This is because, as we mentioned on the last webinar series that PIPC has hosted, we are currently conducting the My Life with Sickle Cell Disease survey. This survey is being led by Sickle Cells the SCDAA, and other organizations. And we have overall been really successful in hearing from the community. Currently, we have 231 respondents to the survey. Our goal is to hit 300. However, the survey closes tomorrow. So we really hope that everyone on this call has the opportunity, if you're a patient or if you're a caregiver, or if you have any friends that are patients or caregivers, please take the survey, because again, this information from the survey will be shared with ICER and ultimately used in some of their analyses. This will be really important because often the patient perspective is missing from these type of reports, and this is an opportunity for our community to have our voice included. Next slide. The next part that we wanted to highlight was the inclusion of cost-effectiveness analyses. So as Ashley mentioned, this is a major section of the report, and you'll see where ICER does their analysis looking at the costs and the outcomes associated with each of the treatments included there in the review. At this time, one of the concerns that we want to highlight is that it is likely for ICER to determine that these sickle cell disease treatments are not cost effective. So what does this mean? It means that the report calculates a price of the drug. And currently, ICER's price does not match with the list price on certain drugs, on the drugs under review. So again, this is a concern for our community and marks the importance of having patients and advocates get involved and make sure their voice is heard during this time. Next slide. The next part we want to highlight is the scope of the assessment. It's important to note that majority of the evidence that is used in ICER's report was from randomized controlled trials. This is an important limitation that results from this. As patients, we understand the difference between control trials and the data that is achieved compared to real-world data. Additionally, clinical trials have a very specific duration, and at this time, there's a real lack of understanding of what the long-term outcomes for these brand new treatments are. Given this significant uncertainty, we're concerned about ICER's ability to be able to understand the true benefit that these treatments can offer our patients. Next slide. Another important part, next slide, sorry. Another important part to discuss is the comparators. So during ICER's analysis, they compare each intervention or each of the treatments to what they call optimal usual care. As patients and as community members, we know that usual care is not clearly defined and that each patient presents differently. So given this is a real concern to use this as a comparator. Additionally, the usual care that's provided in clinical trials in controlled settings are very different from what patients experience in the real world. So another thing that we wanted to note was that some of the clear guidelines that are outlined from the American Society of Hematology do not appear to be accurately captured in the report as well. Again, all of these are reasons for patients to get involved and share their real-world stories about how sickle cell disease has impacted them. Next slide. The next key component of the report is talking about how ICER is measuring benefit. So again, their report is looking at each of these treatments and trying to define how much benefit they can offer society. Well, clinical trials are very focused, and they have selected outcomes such as VOCs that can be easily measured during clinical trials. However, oftentimes the outcomes that are really meaningful to patients, for example, fatigue or chronic pain, are sometimes difficult to capture in clinical trials. Because of this, they are not accurately assessed in ICER's value assessment, which really makes us concerned on ICER's ability to measure the true benefit of these treatments. Next slide. It's also important for us to note that much of ICER's report discusses the reduction of pain crises. However, using clinical trial data, the report relies on the definition of pain crises as seeking medical intervention. So for a patient to go into the ER or go into the doctor's appointment to seek some form of intervention. However, we as community members know that oftentimes sickle cell disease patients can manage these pain crises at home, and that's what's really happening in the real world. So currently in ICER's report, these type of management at home are not captured in their report. Again, this is an important area that we need patients to speak to and talk about how often they are managing pain at home. Next slide. Another important component of the report is looking at the lifespan and how these treatments might be able to improve lifespan. The report assumes that the average lifespan of a sickle cell disease patient is 45 years of age. And then the report proceeds to make other assumptions about improvements of life. However, as Ashley discussed in the beginning, and as we talked about, given the limitations of using clinical trial data, there's not adequate data that we feel can support these assumptions. Next slide. And then during the last webinar, our PIPC team gave a great in-depth review of the quality adjusted life years, or the QALYs. We talked at that time about how QALYs are a really poor method for evaluating value of interventions, and especially given the complex nature of sickle cell disease and the factors that Ashley talked about, the disparities that our population has faced. We really feel that this is a major concern that we need to speak to during our public comments. Next slide. So again, those are just some of the areas that we've highlighted. We hope that that helps break down the report. As we know, it is a long document and it's very technical. We are available if anyone has any additional questions, but at this time, I'd like to hand it off to Beverly Francis Gibson to talk about what's ahead and how patients and advocates can get involved at this time.
Beverly, don't forget to unmute. Hello, Beverly?
Well, I think why Beverly is connecting to audio, I can walk us through some of the specifics here. So again, as Ashley mentioned, this is public comment period is now open. So we invite people members of our community to review the report and take some time to digest what you've learned today. The report link is included here. And then after that, we hope that you choose to stand up and submit comments to ICER. You can do this in two ways. Advocates can submit directly to ICER by emailing them their letter, and we've included the email address here. Also, more information about this is included on ICER's website. Or Sickle Cells is also fielding a submission form where if individuals find it's easier to submit your concerns or submit your comments to us, we can then format and submit the comments directly to ICER. For more information on how to do that, please go to our website at sickcells.org/shareyourstory. And again, I want to note that all these comments are due by Thursday, February 20th. Is Beverly back online? Okay. Well, and then how to stay engaged. Please follow PIPC's website, which is valueourhealth.org/sickle cell. This is a great review of what the community is working on and summarizes our advocacy efforts. Please plan to attend the public meeting if possible in Boston on March 26th. Also, as Ashley mentioned, we'll be having other ways to continue elevating the voice of the patient over the next few months, and we'll be doing this through storytelling and other efforts. So please reach out to Thayer at PIPC if you're interested in getting involved in anything like this.
Beverly, I do see your name. Can you try now?
Yes, can you hear me?
We hear you.
You can?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wonderful. Thank you. I just want to thank all of my colleagues for providing great information to you, and we really hope that you will understand how important it is that we hear from you and that you encourage your friends and family members to share your stories and to be a part of the meeting on March 26th if you can possibly attend. And if not, to tune in to the webinar that will be available through ICER. We are also available at this time for any questions that you have. Ashley and Maggie, Lakia, thank you so much, PIPC. The team has done a tremendous work in a short amount of time to ensure that we are able to relay this information in a way that's digestible for everyone. And so at this time, we're going to open it up for questions, and also feel free to use the chat link on the webinar to actually ask specific questions of the speakers this afternoon. So we'll stop and see if you have any questions.
Francine asks, will the slides be available after the webinar?
Yes.
Yes, Francine, the slides will be made available. I believe you can find them at valueourhealth.org/sickle cell.
Sickle cell, correct.
Everyone, you can type your question into the chat, or you can unmute. Remember, you are muted. You have to unmute your call, and then you can ask it yourself directly. Are there? Okay, Ellen Warner from NHMBI would like to make a comment.
Hi, thank you very much. I was very glad that when I saw this email the other day, I did see the ICER report when it came out, and I did review it, although not in depth. Now, I'm not making recommendations because I think, can you all hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. I think as an NHLBI staff member, I shouldn't make recommendations. I have questions, though, that I'm just throwing out for people to consider. What appeared to me is that there were some pieces of information missing in these cost-effectiveness analyses, and I could not find where there were comparisons of the cost of hospitalization, rehospitalization, like in the emergency department, cost of admission and readmission for the different therapies compared to the current approved therapies, including hydroxyurea and glutamine. So I didn't see that. So I'm wondering, I'm asking questions, not making recommendations. I'm just wondering if ICER took those comparative cost into account. I also, and I'm glad you included the average length of years for sickle cell patients, because often what we see in cost analyses is the cost of potential years of life lost. I didn't see that in this report, and maybe I missed it. Now, I'm also wondering if they included comparisons about the loss of work, both by patients and parents, caregivers, so that when people have to call in and can't work, there's a cost there in terms of their economic participation in the economy. So I just looked at the report and said, gee, maybe I'm missing something, and I leave it to you all. You know, and I can be in contact with you all if you'd like me to write something. You know, if you want me to make these points in an email to you, I'd be happy to do it. But again, being at NIH, I have to be very careful.
We understand, Ellen, and I think Ashley can speak to some of those questions and those missing points that you mentioned.
Thank you.
Sure, yes. Thank you for those points. We actually have a lot of the same questions that you highlighted. I will say a piece of the report that talks about the caregiver burden and the loss of wages and sorts that's currently not included there. And so Sickle Cells is working with the SCDAA to field a survey to try to capture some of that information. And so that's the goal of the survey. But again, that survey is, it's been open for 2 weeks. It's online digitally. I mean, there's limitations within that survey. So, I mean, it's a pretty narrow scope of the survey, but we're trying to capture some of that to include it in the report. Maggie, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
No, just thank you for your comments. And yes, we would love to stay in touch via email. That would be great.
And Francine, that I think is part of the answer to your question. So Francine asks, what options do we have to provide input after today and outside of the public meeting in Boston? The survey is one way to do that as a caregiver, Francine, but also, I'll pull the slide back up. There was an address given to share your story and to send additional information to Sickle Cells and to PIPC. Ashley, do you want to comment on that?
Sure, yeah. So the ways to comment on the report and submit your story is through right now we're in the public comment period. And so you can submit a public comment directly to ICER, and there's formatting requirements, or Sickle Cells has created a online form for people to submit their comments to, and then we'll format it on the back end and submit it for you. And then additionally, outside of the public comments, there will be some storytelling efforts. And so you can email Thayer at PIPC if you would like to be involved in some of the storytelling methods.
I believe that slide should be on your screen now, Francine, with those addresses. Websites, public comments at ICER-review.org and sickcells.org/share your story. Are there any other questions? All right, let me check the chat box once more. Well, that seems to be the last of the questions inside of the chat box. Does anyone on the call have any other questions? Do remember to unmute your call. And if not, would PIPC, Thayer, Maggie, Ashley, Beverly, any of you have any last minute comments?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Does the ICER report discuss anything pertaining in terms of iron therapy and fetal hemoglobin? I have sickle cell. That's why I want that.
So, no, the report did not go into those type of details. And I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that they would report on for this.
Oh, okay.
But there are other classes that we've done at Warrior U that gets into that topic. And I believe that, Beverly, at CDAA, you all have some classes that you all have done as well, I think, in advocacy training and I think in disease expert disease sessions. Is that correct?
Yes, as part of our Leadership Academy, we actually have a session on February 20th on advocacy, and then the other disease states later on this year.
Yep. And so this is Ashley also. So in the actual ICER report, they do look at ion chelators. So what they do is they measure the economic cost of certain conditions or certain treatments. And one of those are blood transfusions. And so they are including chelators into the price of blood transfusions.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions?
This is Ashley one more time. I would like to say, in regards to the chelators, in the survey that we're collecting, we also list out chelators as a separate cost as well. Thank you for bringing that up, because I do think many people forget that for every blood transfusion received, then people then have to go on chelators to prevent iron overload.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm not really familiar with ICER much. So my question is a general question. Is this standard for when medications come out approved, like within 3 months, to have this analysis done? Is this a standard practice for medications that are FDA approved to have this analysis done so soon, or is this unusual?
So this is Ashley. So some of the past presentations have talked about the history of ICER. And so ICER is a standalone nonprofit, so they don't impact FDA. And ICER tends to do these types of reviews for medications that do have higher price tags. And some of their reasoning is that they want to balance out the societal burden of absorbing high price medications and sorts. So for sickle cell disease, we have these new treatments onto the market that do come under the price tag of $80,000 to $100,000 a year. Now, mind you, that cost never reaches the patient. That is the cost associated with developing the medications. You know, insurance gets a piece of that cost. Payers get a piece of that cost. So there's various other entities involved in the pricing. So for sickle cell disease in particular, this ICER review will look at those 3 drugs, but there are other rare diseases and other disease states that ICER has reviewed when they have new treatments coming to market.
Okay, so I guess the answer to my question is this is standard that they do this analysis pretty soon after the medication is on the market?
So ICER sets their own timeline, and it varies. So if you look at sickle cell disease, Indaria has actually been on the market now for over 2 years. And the 2 new drugs just got approved in November, but ICER had started to review the drugs back in August.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. Anyone else have any questions? And don't forget, you can reach out to all of us on this call and ask questions after the fact. And you can also go to the Value Our Health /sickle cell to find out more information about this. Please don't forget the survey. It closes tomorrow. And if there are any more questions, there aren't any more questions or last minute comments, we will let you all go. This was recorded, so we will trim out a lot of the chatter at the beginning and at the end, and the recording will be available Value Our Health /sickle cell as well. Any last minute comments? Closing statements? Go ahead.
I would like to know the survey. Is it only for caregivers, or can I take the survey?
So the survey is for people living with sickle cell disease, so patients with sickle cell disease, and for caregivers.
Oh, okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're so close to 300. I really do think with this last push, we can get to that 300 before tomorrow. So please share the survey with all the caregivers you know, and remind people that if you have sickle cell and you're a patient, all of your caregivers can also take the survey. Parents, siblings, let them all take it. And we'll get that to 300 by tomorrow. Thank you, Beverly and Ashley, PIPC, and everyone for all of the effort you all have put into this. Are there any other questions?
Thank you, Lakia, for hosting it on the consortium site for us.
No problem at all.
Have a good day.
You. Thank you, everyone. You all have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everything.